the contribution of planning? What are the priorities? What are the goals that must be revised in the plans of your governments in light of post-COVID recovery and having in mind mid and long-term venues? What are the ideas to diminish inequalities, territorial inequalities in the recovery? And finally, what about sub-level response? How has that contributed to the national recovery plans? I immediately give the floor to Mildred Granadillo de la Torre, Vice Minister of Economy and Planning from Cuba. You're on, madam. Thank you, Mildred. I bring greetings from Cuba to all present. We find that this is an excellent space to exchange experience between our countries and it came back and she was reading the title. We need to promote new processes. Audio went off. I'm sorry. There's no way to interpret when the audio is so interrupted. It came back. In this scenario, we also have the approval of the new constitution in April that set priorities to the development of the territories. No sound. There's no audio. There's a need to leverage this as an instrument to face the pandemic. Here I quote a sentence from our president from July, and he said, everything that we do must be articulated at the municipality level. This must be done through training of the governors at local levels. Audio's off. From the beginning of the pandemic, or a bit earlier, December last year, we already had a view on how to face the world and the impact for our country. No audio? I'm sorry, there's no audio? In facing this very long crisis due to the pandemic. The government has a plan in order to have a direct effect locally towards the social development of the country. We believe that this is the framework to face the pandemic in order to give thrust to our economy. In this implementation, the local governments are essential. They are the link between the central government and the local communities. Therefore, in this endeavor, we are now through a process led by the Economy and Planning Ministry, but with the participation of the academia, provincial, municipal authorities, and other institutions in order to update the methodological framework for the preparation of municipal development strategies. In our national plan till 2030, we have as one of the goals that by 2031, all municipalities will have to have their own municipal development strategies. We have experiences in planning processes. In the last few years, we have designed for our economy a series of aspects, indicators that are used to allocate resources in each municipality. No audio? I'm afraid there's no audio. We have now a series of indicators that show the differences we have between different territories. There are some municipalities that have more capabilities and that use appropriately their resources. No audio? And this year, we have seen that the municipalities have more autonomy. We have provided them a toolkit, and this has been joined by an urban agenda. No audio? We do have a second plan for decentralization and for financing territorial development. This, in turn, will strengthen territorial capabilities with planning at local levels. And this process is led by the Ministry of Economy, as well as members from the academia and university. The strategy for territorial development planning has adopted measures in view of COVID through a coordination from municipal levels. But let me say that we have been working physically in these municipalities. We're talking about decentralization of planning so that local decisions may be adopted in order to face the socio-economic constraints that some are facing. No audio? I'm sorry, the sound really goes on and off. Someone has interrupted to tell the speaker that the audio goes on and off frequently. It's still off. Miss Adriana? Miss Mildred? Can you hear me, Miss Mildred? I am from ECLAC. Can you hear me, Miss Mildred? We are trying to call you by phone in order to improve the connection because your connection is really being interrupted all the time and we cannot hear you. Did you hear me, Miss Mildred? Yes, I can hear you loud and clear. Yes, I'm afraid the audio is really of bad quality. We have very bad connection. Please do not open up, turn on the visual display. No camera, please. Let us try to have audio communication by phone. No, please do not set the camera on because then the connection will be even worse. We're trying to call you, madam, so we may get a telephone connection. Miss Mildred, we will call you to your cell phone. And you will place the audio by WebEx. They're going to call her by phone. For the sake of time, perhaps we continue with the next speaker. Yes, certainly. That's a very good idea. One second, we're almost ready to go.
Cuba, ¿nos escuchan? Nuevamente probando.
Cuba, can you hear us? Once again, testing. Should we start from the beginning again? There's an echo now. He's asking her to disconnect the computer audio. She's going to start again from the beginning of the presentation. Well, thank you, and we apologize for the technical issues. This is a problem with these communications. As we were saying, that the situation in Cuba is favorable for these processes of local territorialization. As part of the national economic and social development for 2030, a special policy based on adapting government public agendas at municipal level as well as provincial level. We also have in our favor the recent Constitution of the Republic that was adopted in April 2019 and that strengthens territorial development, backing decentralization and municipal autonomy processes. In that context, with the COVID-19 pandemic, we believe that it was absolutely necessary to enhance local development as a tool for response to the pandemic. We would like to mention what was said by the President in the middle of the year when he says, everything that we do must be on the basis of the municipalities. And so, this year, an economic and social strategy was adopted to drive forward the economy and respond to the crisis produced by COVID-19. 16 key areas in the strategy, and each one considers engagement by municipal and provincial governments for development. The strategy is a roadmap that we believe is the coherent framework for transformations to be implemented by the country in order to respond to the visible challenges imposed on our country. Implementation considers that local governments are essential and the link between the central government and the communities, and that they play an essential role in the participation and integration of all players in society. And so we have a process to train, exchanging experiences in order to update and draft guidelines to develop development strategies at municipal and provincial level. In the past, we have assessed what's done. We've been able to have a development strategy for not only the short term, but also the medium to long term. That is a development approach that we have considered in our plan, the National Economic and Social Development Plan from now to 2030, very much linked to the 2030 agenda. Together with a group of experts from the territories and members of the central government, working on the design of the Index of Territorial Development as an indicator that we consider provides us information and where we should focus our activities to promote development at each municipality. We've assessed the potential capacity available at municipal level and have identified municipalities that with endogenous resources can further their potential. We have other municipalities that don't make the most of this because their development index is below their capacity. And we have other municipalities where the capacity is low, and so it is necessary to work together with other municipalities in order to together achieve development. This strategy also involves social aspects, institutions, the environment. And so it is truly an integral strategy that includes each key aspect considered in the National Plan for 2030. And in this process, we've also believed it is necessary to connect with national plans and provincial municipal plans for urban zoning as a tool to develop comprehensively. And we have formed a new network that is a vital tool to be considered by our country and each territory. And so there we have a toolkit to support what is being done by each government level, always within the idea of making municipalities as the key players. Also, we have a diploma course offered nationally and led by the Ministry of Economy and Planning, specifically on decentralization and financing territorial development, because we believe that what we have foreseen to be developed and exchanging with each stakeholder, the municipalities and the government, will without a doubt strengthen territorial capacities with a view to promote planning, management, and other processes at local level within the framework of the socio-economic reactivation post-COVID-19. So, based on this strategic planning for territorial development, we must say that coordination teams at provincial level have continued to work on this throughout this extensive period affected by the pandemic, always with the idea of responding to the national plan that was adopted by the government at the start of this year, and where there are more than 500 measures to be complemented among all our provinces and territories with the engagement of universities, scientists, research centers, and others in order to successfully address the effects and minimize the impact of the pandemic. So these provincial coordination teams have worked together with our provincial and municipal governments, our councils for municipal defense, and we've doubled efforts and reviewed all our strategies and plans to encourage local production of food with our endogenous resources, with a plan for municipal self-supply, and that considers the engagement of people to achieve these purposes. As I said, we've encouraged scientific and technical coaching by universities and the government to work with the companies that farm. And also, online, we hold video conferences with the municipalities to follow up on the design of this municipal development plan and the local development projects. Cuba has more than 507 projects for local development, and that right now we're assessing each one to see how they feed into the national development plan. And throughout this process, we have been accompanied by a government group led by the Center for Demographic Studies, because our country faces high levels of aging, and the population is the key of all our development strategy at country as well as municipal level. And so we must see how are we going to achieve that development and how we're going to develop our people, our elderly people, our women, our young people, to make the best use possible of the available resources. There are also cultural initiatives, social networks, among others, in this sense. We have experience that goes back to 2015, together with the UN program, the Platform for Integral Territorial Development, which is what was agreed on with the government. It is a framework program that aims to strengthen institutional capacities for planning and management of local development, seen as a collective, integrative, multi-level and multiplayer model that seeks to contribute to the territorialization of SDGs in Cuba, led by the Ministry of Economy and Planning, but the National Institute for Economic Research works with us, the National Institute for Planning, PICHICA, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and also ministers and the UNDP. We do this with national, provincial, and municipal governments. Likewise, we've carried out actions and financing for specific projects that have all aimed towards the development of these territories. So, this has helped strengthening strategic activities and are aligned with the national plan for response to the pandemic. So the priority of local governments in coordination with national authorities to implement initiatives for socioeconomic reactivation. We consider that the sectors that are of priority include food production, local tourism that is sustainable, local industry, recovering trade and innovation, and improving the quality of services and renewable energy. These projects enhance economic development by adopting modern technology to implement mini industry for fruit and veg production. Unfortunately, it seems that she has been disconnected. We have no further audio. She now continues. The National Group for the 2030 Plan and contributing to the design of territorial development policy recently adopted and that will be passed with a special decree. An integral part of the plan for socioeconomic response to the pandemic that will be implemented in Cuba for an 18-month period. The Territorial Development Index to measure territorial activities, identifying the gaps between municipalities, and laboratories to follow up on the attainment of SDGs in 4 provinces of the country: Del Río, Santo Espíritu, Artemisa, and Cienfuegos. Also, a set of tools for territorial development and municipal autonomy with regard to planning, financing, measuring, governance, e-governance with a gender perspective, partnerships between local governments and academia through universities in the territories, highlighting centers for strategic planning for integral development at provincial level. So 27 production and social development initiatives in all provinces and municipalities. In broad terms, we wanted to show what our country has done this year and that we have consolidated a set of actions that we've been working on in recent years in response to one of the priorities of a national economic and social development for 2030, and that is the role of municipalities. We have realized it was necessary to create a set of tools to implement public policies at local level, thereby feeding into the development and our vision for Cuba in the 2030, and a bit beyond, because we are already including longer-term forecasts in order to meet each goal. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Mildred, por tan interesante presentación.
Well, thank you very much for that very interesting presentation. And now I'll hand over to Ms. Ochoa, the Minister of Planning and Development in Guatemala. Once again, I would now like to recognize Engineer Luis Mesa Ochoa, Undersecretary for Planning and Programming for Development in Guatemala. Please confirm that you can hear us.
Hola, sí, tenemos al señor Luis Mesa, ¿ok? Está su micrófono.
Mr. Luis Mesa is online. Could you please speak so we can test? We see your camera is working, but we cannot hear you. Please, if you could try to connect your audio. The lower part where you have your microphone, there is an arrow. Audio options, go to settings, and there on the microphone you could select and please watch the indicator to make sure that your microphone is working.
Le confirmamos cuando escuchemos.
Está apagado, ¿eh?
Bueno, señora Mariana.
What we could do is perhaps move on to the next speaker. Well, in that case, we will recognize Pavel Isa Contreras, the Vice Minister for Planning, Ministry of Economic Affairs of the Dominican Republic. Yes, thank you very much, Mariana. It is a pleasure to be here. It's my first time in a setting such as this, and I'm very pleased to share with you. The first thing, instead of doing a presentation, is to talk with you and offer you our impressions, learnings, and our mission at government level. This new government in Guatemala, we came into office on August. How we see recovery and how we see planning and recovery ahead. For this, I will merely talk about 8 main items. First of all, the philosophy. I believe this is important in line with what Mario Cimeli mentioned. First, development is not a personal adventure. We have insisted on this repeatedly, and it is an important part of the government program. It is a collective effort that requires a deliberate effort. It will not occur systematically looking at the macroeconomy and waiting for markets to resolve. No, it must be an agreed-on effort, and I underscore this includes industrial policies or production policies. Now, for collective public action to be effective, planning plays a key role because it ensures that actions will be coherent, consistent, and orderly, and that we can measure impacts. Now,
and along those lines, I need to say that in order to guarantee quality of expenses, that is one of the most important challenges we have in the region, but particularly in the Dominican Republic, where the demand for substantial improvement in the quality of expenditure has been very strong in the social movements and political parties. The planning has to play a key role there. Now, policies need to have a territorial dimension because people live in specific territories, and the well-being or lack thereof, or opportunities or lack of opportunities, occur in specific territories and environments. That is why, from the Ministry of Economy, Planning and Development, we are paying special attention to territory of planning, instruments for planning and territory for planning. What we have perceived that in Dominican Republic, the territory has been invisible, completely invisible, and planning is absolutely sector-driven. And there is no territory. This is one piece of data that is most striking. That was the first set of ideas. Second set of ideas. In Dominican Republic, we have an adequate regulation framework. Constitution is very clear and mandatory regarding the need of territorially balanced development, and the national development strategy until 2030, and that is a law already in force, specifically refers to territorial development and territorial cohesion. In fact, it urges the creation of territorial equality or dimension, but also the law of public investment is very clear and orders to articulate processes so planning can be territory-driven and sector-driven. And we have a robust regulatory framework allowing us to move forward, to do many things. Third idea, in spite of having progress in planning in the country, there are two outstanding elements. There are many, many instruments, and we have a whole set, a broad set of tools for planning. And also there is a certain culture, planning culture in the Dominican state. I mean, public entities or institutions have been already doing planning work for 8 years now. In spite of the progress, the gaps are very significant. First, planning is non-effective. To say it clearly, it's poetry. Planning is poetry. It's a nice book that has been published without teeth. And there is a clear mission in this ministry to transform that. It's not only penalizing, but it's rather to offer incentives to go into a relationship between the planning instruments, the ministry, to have a positive not a zero-sum game, more than zero, and to provide quality to efforts and policies of sectoral activities. That is one first challenge. And a second challenge, or rather a second gap that we have, is the absence of territory within the planning effort. You take the institutional strategic plans and the territory is absent. In a public sector planning, the territory is absent. Fourth idea, we have two main missions. First, to make planning work, to make it work. And we are doing two things. First, articulating budget and planning, articulating the two together. That's central. That's key. It's not only a mission of our ministry, but also from the finance ministry. There is clear awareness that without planning, the budget ends up being non-effective, non-efficient. And we know that without money, planning has very little strength. I mean, we are doing special efforts to articulate budget with planning. And the other point is that we are trying that planning be outcome-based or results-based. What public entities have done is plan in a backward fashion. First, you have a production and then you have the goals. No. We need to start what are the results we want in social terms? More maternal mortality, coverage of bandwidth, education, just to say those things. And based on that, we need to see what are the necessary products to get those outcomes, what are the input to get those outputs, what is indispensable. We need to change the dynamics. It's the entity said, this is what I can do. And I will see what general objective of the National Development Strategy I can link to. No. It's the other way round. It has to be also based on territory. I mean, instruments for planning need to be territorially based. We need to have a method to fill in the gaps or to comply with the demand of the national legislation to have something effective. And that means strengthening the planning skills of the districts or municipalities, because territory not only should be visible centrally, but not top down, but rather bottom up, and promoting planning from municipalities, from districts, with participation, because the law says that it be done by development municipal councils. I mean, district councils. So that is one strong idea of the new government. And the challenge is very big, because the national territory, or rather there is tremendous political administrative fragmentation. We have almost 400 municipal entities in a country of 42,000 kilometers. I mean, so there are no intermediate levels of government. We only have central government and local ones, which are autonomous. So how to link, how to join these two levels, that is one of the tremendous needs. And at the same time, strengthening planning abilities from bottom up. Fifth idea, I think the health crisis has made evident that territories operate in a very different manner. And for that reason is that certain territories have had certain impacts on some and different ones in others. Different epidemic impacts by territory, because they are very different and therefore they call for different responses. The virus came into the territories connected to abroad because of the major tourism poles or major urban centers. And then it spread to the main cities of the country, while in the more rural areas, the incidence of the virus has been much less. Where there has been greater infection contagion is where you have population density territories or where you have more economic activities. So the responses have been differentiated from the past government. In the case of responses for limiting the spread, the lockdown was very much concentrated in urban areas, and the effort in the rural areas, the effort was focused in production so as to have the food chains fully operational from the farm to the consumption, to the consumer. So there was a strategy. It was completely the opposite to urban areas. That is, to lock down production in urban areas and promoting production in rural ones. Sixth idea, national, or rather local responses have been very weak. Very much responses have come from the central level. And that is related to the fact that local governments are very weak. There is a major prevalence of the central government, and there is a fragmentation of local governments. There are no major partnerships or articulations. making a difference. Also, I must say that responses have been differentiated in social protection issues. Responses have concentrated in urban areas insofar as health, social protection, protection of the employment, and cash transfers in order to support consumption. Seventh idea, and with this I will be sticking to time allotted. I think I'm repeating the idea. The response at the central level has been highly differentiated in health issues. In health, the health response has been reactive, responding to the different outbreaks. Where have they been identified, and where the ICUs and the beds are being filled out, and that moving then to another sector. And with that, idle capacity in healthcare institutions has been maintained relatively well, although there has been some critical situations in a few places. And then finally, yes, we are speaking about responses. First, differential protection. What is happening now, a country that had a fiscal deficit continues ongoing, equivalent to 2 or 3% of GDP. The deficit of this year will be 10% of GDP. I mean, if we are lucky, it will be only 9%. And that has been mainly because of the tremendous amount of resources that the previous government and this government are investing in social protection programs. Job protection, or phase 1, phase 2, social, the fund for social employment assistance, and then stay at home and non-conditioned cash transfer program, addressing or targeting populations that are not in the formal labor sector. There are some supplementary programs supporting informal employment, and with that, fiscal deficit has skyrocketed. Next year, we believe that we will need to continue with the social protection programs at least a quarter. And of course, depending with the epidemic, we are not navigating with an engine, but rather it's a sail navigation. And we don't know if this second wave that is taking place in Europe will come to this side of the Atlantic and to this country. So we believe that we need to maintain some type of differentiated program. In the budget, it's not contemplated. This is the budget law that is being discussed in Congress, and we need to change that and include it. But at the same time, we are pushing forward for planning to incorporate recovery from two perspectives: sectoral perspective and territorial, or territory-based with a territory perspective. So we are working jointly with the UN system, IDB, World Bank, and EU in order to do what's known COVID recovery needs assessment, CRNA. And the idea is to work on this assessment, but including planning in it. It has been done in Ecuador, El Salvador, but in the Dominican Republic, what we are doing is to do this work in parallel with the institutional and national planning processes, so that the recovery dimension be in the DNA of planning, at least for the first 2 years or complete year or 2 years of the new government. In sectoral terms, the prospect needs to emphasize education, health, agriculture, water, and in territory, it should pay attention mainly to the major urban centers. I leave it at that. Thank you. Thank you, Pavel, for your presentation and the landscape you drew about your country. Now, Luis Arturo. Can you hear me now? Thank you. Cordial greetings to everyone from Guatemala. Sincere apologies on behalf of our Secretary General of Planning that had to go to the presidency. And we, as Secretary General of Planning of the presidency, it's a pleasure to participate in this very important forum today. So please, may I share, or can you put on the screen the slides we have prepared for today? Please, share screen. To interpreters, we are only for Friday afternoon for 45. The rest. It's a pleasure to share with you in this meeting of the presiding officers of the National Planning Council. I thank the opportunity for sharing what our experience, especially within the framework of the emergency generated by the COVID-19 pandemic. One first element is the prospects in force. They are not relaxed and should be maintained given the waves or situations of second outbreaks you have in different areas in the world. Although the possibility of a COVID vaccine is promising, but it's uncertain. And so we need to think that for the time being, we need to adjust sales to the COVID situation, and we need to adapt and coexist with this pandemic that is very much in force. And it's important, and what's the effort or what's the challenge is to double our efforts in order to avoid that the impact be greater than what we have seen in this year. Thank you for the presentation. Indeed, the pandemic of COVID-19 has evidenced a good part of the states of our countries, has evidenced the weaknesses insofar as organic capacity or the structure of institutions, installed capacity, especially at the level of territories, in order to respond to this emergency.
And in view of the emergency, we're all at post-COVID, we will initially be able to strengthen the capacities of the public institutions. Always considering that the territories have diverse situations. Things vary from territory to territory. That means that the response must be adapted to these needs. Naturally, in Guatemala, there are strong gaps, and as a result, we must guide our action with a territorial focus in order to attend to these areas where there is more poverty or vulnerability. As a matter of fact, in going over 340 municipalities, we find that 114 of these are responsible for about 33% of the municipalities that have been receiving priority for the need of special care and attention because of the greater level of vulnerability. Now, the macroeconomic situation is inevitable due to the pandemic. Economic growth has been shrinking as in other countries. In Guatemala, about 2% of GDP is what to be expected. We had actually thought that we would grow at 6%, but now with the changing scenarios, we have diminished that figure. Contrary to world data, according to the fund, the IMF, that is happening. But still, we are facing a negative effect in my country. Now, let us take a look at what the government is doing. Let me say that in March, a few days after we were aware of the first case of infection in the country, a general plan for COVID-19 was set up. That was a technical committee that went to the Congress, and 3 decrees were passed, number 12, 13, and 20 of this year. And these allowed for the allocation of resources from different sources. And as you can see, we're talking about 14,600 million, about $1,900,000 approx. And this was to be aimed at emergency attention in view of the pandemic, to help out with farmers, irrigation systems, and the production of foodstuff, different programs to assist SMEs with capital investment programs, also addressing older persons. We're talking about an additional 20,000 that were added to the initial 100,000 that were receiving this. In short, there were a series of programs such as food stuff in order to help out the more vulnerable families with food stuff during the peak of the confinement and lockdown. This package of assistance includes also monetary transfers into different villages and groups for people who had been identified as being unemployed or people who belong to the informal markets. And by the way, about 70% is the figure of informality in the country. It's a large figure. And to these persons also, the monetary transfer was allocated. Part of these resources were also addressed or sent to subsidies, such as, for example, the construction of hospitals or facilities in order to be able to care for COVID patients. This was the initial response of the government in view of the pandemic, having the backup of the high authorities, political authorities in the country. In this case, the response and the support came through the immediate passing of these laws that were in charge of the implementation of these programs to attend this emergency, the health emergency. Let's go to the next slide, please. Now, as to the budget for the next fiscal year, we see that in the previous year, in February of this year, without still facing the pandemic, we saw the beginning of a budgetary cycle. In March, though, the emergency arrived. Adjustments were then made in order to channel new budget for the emergency. This plan used all of the tools that had already been available in order to allocate this budget. Goods and services were also involved in order to get these to the most needy. Now, the budget for 2021 talks about $12,800 million. And on November 30th, the Congress is to be informed of that budget, to either approve or to modify it, naturally in view of the needs of the moment. But the budget is supposed to be approved in November, the end of November of this year. That involves 95 million quetzales. And in responding to COVID, a special item has been added with about 4,500 million quetzales. This special chapter of the budget in Guatemala 2021 is mainly involved, going to be involved in macro projects. And this is involving projects to connect different areas of the country. And this eventually will have an important impact in the economy of the country. This also involves the construction of new hospitals. Because, as we know, the emergency is needing more infrastructure, health infrastructure. So we foresee the building of new hospitals, educational centers, and equally important is the agricultural needs with new irrigation systems. And the Agricultural Ministry is looking at the production of basic grain in order to ensure food reserves, as well as agri-production infrastructure for certain territories that have to do with processing, packaging, and the production of some of these goods. By the next year, according to the budget submitted to the Congress, we see that this budget will strengthen the capacities, operational capacities of public management. It also aims at improving the efficiency in the use of resources. We must be efficient, but also successful, so that the production of goods and services may really reach the needy territories. The executive also wishes to contain expenditure, but some items are truly necessary. The idea is to strengthen partnerships with local governments. This is very, very important in order to mitigate the effect of COVID-19. The current administration has adopted a general policy and this is centered in 5 pillars with 50 goals. An analysis has just been made on these goals. We are truly aware of the fact that some of these goals will not be met, but the government wishes to maintain these goals and naturally adjusting the strategy up to the end of this administration. The goal has to do with the mechanism for the midterm implementation of what we deem our development strategy, main development strategies and goals. It is believed that at least 42% of the goals of the 50 under our government policy, it is believed that half of these goals will probably not be met, especially in the pillars having to do with economy, prosperity, and social development pillar. The uncertainty on the duration of the pandemic doesn't allow us to make true projections on the short-term effect, at least on social, environmental, and economic standpoints. So the measures adopted by the government in facing the state of emergency that has been decreed by the government in order to be able to fully implement all the actions that are needed. And the impact of these measures have been positive. They have mitigated the effect of the pandemic up to a certain extent. Let us go now to the last slide. Now, in talking about territorialization and the response to the pandemic, the Presidential Committee on COVID, and with our action as well from the planning side, an initiative was adopted to implement a warning system. And as you can tell, this shows the different territories that have different categories. And according to these categories, certain restriction or certain leniency may be applied according to what's happening with the infections. On some, there is more openness for bars and restaurants to open up. Right now, we are talking about 106 municipalities on red flag, red warning. and there more restriction is applied. There are about 100 municipalities with an orange warning system where there's a little more flexibility, and then there's a yellow warning or flag where there are less restrictions. Unfortunately, we have no municipality with a green flag, which would be the category that would allow for normalcy of all activities. These are measures that have to do with different variables, and that they are the cases proven, number of tests applied, and the screening involved. This is updated every 15 days. And there are some municipalities where the economy or the openness allow for the introduction again of other activities that had been on hold. What's more important, we wish to go back to the creation of income and revenue and the opening up of jobs in order to revamp the economy. As we have already heard here, planning should be closely related to the territorialization that would bring down public policies. We do have a national development plan that is called CATUM, and that has been related to the 2030 agenda. And there we find the 99 goals that have to do with our CATUM plan and the 2030 agenda. We have 10 national priorities that we started with. And we realize that it's very important to go into territorialization. We have 22 departments coming from 22 provinces. And within these states, we have 340 municipalities with different realities and with different social, economic situations, as well as environmental. Some are located in the east of the country, as well as in the central and west part of the country. These are the ones where we find greatest gaps. Municipal development plans and territorial plans are being applied. Right now we have 260 plans, and 50 are to be applied this year, with a coverage eventually of 90% of the country. And this is to become an instrument for management and decision-making, as well as for the articulation of policies. We wish to bring in the match between all sectors and their needs, trying to channel timely intervention. And finally, we wish to set up mechanisms to distribute and to allocate financial resources, stressing the coverage of basic utilities and input in the most equitable fashion possible within all territories. We do know that there are populations that have greater needs than others. We have in mind greater decentralization so that the intervention and the response may really reach those places where they are most needed. Now, I'd like to take advantage of this regional space to mention the importance of the collaboration with our Central American neighbors and the Caribbean, so that in the borders we may apply good practices and the measures that all of the countries are adopting in order to share best practices. We're talking about a comprehensive system. I am very thankful for the opportunity to be here, and I repeat once more, I'm very thankful to be here. Thank you. Thank you so much. These have been excellent participations from Guatemala, Dominican Republic, Cuba, and eventually, certainly, the local places become so important, and these policies are certainly going to help us to reach those that are more needed. Now, we are 20 minutes behind schedule. I will only give the floor to two questions. Perhaps Isaac.
Estás muteado.
Excuse me. Well, if anyone would like to take the floor, we could hear a couple of colleagues. I don't know if anyone would like to take the floor. I see no request. Can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you. Not now. How are you doing? Good afternoon, if you allow me. On behalf of the Office of National Planning, Ecuador. The audio is broken. Can you hear me better now? The truth is that the audio continues to be broken. Well, since there are issues with the connectivity, could you please speak a little longer? Maybe we can try and fix it. I have a short presentation on the actions taken as the government of Ecuador for recovery after the pandemic. May I continue? Yes. Please be brief on account because we're running very late. Of course. In line with what has been said in the previous presentation, in Ecuador, as you know, we have a planning system, and the territorial aspect is essential. For more than a decade now, since 2008, in fact, we have territorialized national planning. And likewise, we have strategies in terms of how to territorialize our planning. And autonomous, decentralized levels of government, 3 levels, provincial, municipal, and by parish. This is done every 4 years. Now, what have we done as a national government with regard to the pandemic? Well, comprehensively, we have made changes to some laws that prevented us from addressing the pandemic appropriately. Our government term ends in 2021. But right now, we're trying to provide technical assistance. Unfortunately, the audio continues to be broken. It is impossible to understand what the speaker is saying. The plans are updated, and we determine sectors where local planning should be focused, water and others. These were identified with the help of several international agencies, in this case UNDP, and with a special focus on the impact of the pandemic in Ecuador. Some of the outcomes have been dramatic, far worse, considering that the economic crisis that we were undergoing since before the pandemic and was worsened by the pandemic. Plans will focus on these sectors: water, health, and education, and worsened by the economic crisis. But as central government, we have also directed resources to focus on production, farming, health, education, because we need that investment. If the private sector has been affected until they recover, we need to invest resources for that recovery. We've passed a law on humanitarian support, whereby the National Assembly creates a fund of about $1.4 billion to provide loans to the productive sector, which is necessary to have social and economic recovery. The intention is that the private sector may protect employment, because many areas have shut down, and so it has been impossible to maintain employment. So we have the intention of supporting them so that they in turn can help us protect the jobs that we have. Without employment, we will not be able to achieve economic development. Excuse me, but please be brief, because these are this time is for comments on the previous presentations. So please, if you could wrap up, we would be very grateful. Yes, we've also reduced the taxes so that national production will have to deepen. The idea is to facilitate things for the private sector so that they may have the way of investing in these areas to create jobs. And the government has also given special bonuses for the most vulnerable sectors of the population, in addition to subsidies for essential services such as drinking water and electricity. We've carried out several things, and to sum up, because on account of the time we cannot give further explanations, but we want to strengthen things at territorial level. And our highest authorities are right now in meetings to determine the needs at territorial level and make recommendations for the next government, because as I said, our national government in Ecuador ends in May 21. And we must lay the ground for the next government. That is it. Thank you very much for allowing us to tell you a little about what's been done in Ecuador. Have a nice day. Thank you very much, Israel. And so we will now close the panel. Undoubtedly, it's been very interesting. And well, thank you, Mariana, for your work. And now we will move on to the third and last panel of the day on he says he's a bit lost with the time. Planning challenges in building resilient public institutions, policy coherence, and strengthening public management cycle for post-pandemic recovery. We would like to invite José Agustín Espino to moderate the panel with just 2 speakers. I would be one of them, and I promise to be very brief to see if we can recover some of our time. José Agustín, please go ahead. This is José Agustín. Can you hear me? Yes, go ahead. Well, we will have 2 speakers in this panel on planning challenges in building resilient public institutions, policy coherence, intersectorality and multiscalarity, and strengthening the public management cycle for post-pandemic recovery. Which of our colleagues is ready for the presentation? Carlos, are you ready? Yes, here I am, ready and waiting. Okay, go ahead, the floor is yours. If you could allow me to share the presentation. Well, thank you very much for inviting us at the 28th meeting of the Presiding Office of the Regional Council for Planning. I am the Vice Minister for National Planning and Economic Policy of Costa Rica. And on behalf of the Minister, we deeply thank you, and she sends our greetings. Now, I too will try and be as quick as possible. The topic of this panel is to be here for about 2 hours. But perhaps we will focus on resilient public institutions. So, because with the pandemic, institutions must be resilient. The difference between the countries that have achieved better outcomes during the pandemic is the use of prospection, using techniques to measure possible future scenarios and what would the outcome be if we change some variables? Because this has changed the entire way that we've been planning, and today, more than ever before, it's necessary to resort to techniques, not only to foresee future scenarios based on different policies, but also to see how things would be affected if we don't. This was very clear during the first months of the pandemic. The University of Costa Rica, together with the Ministry of Health, devised models to project the level of occupation of the intensive care units if the behavior of contagion continued. And this allowed us to estimate the number of beds that would be needed in different hospitals, but also when. And on this basis, we adopted policies and devised programs to foresee that if these situations occurred, we might attenuate the curve. To provide a context, in the case of the Ministry of Planning in Costa Rica, we're about 3 years away of 100 years. So this is pretty robust, not only in terms of planning, but also assessment and follow-up. And given our mandates under the law, we need to have an updated and prospective diagnosis in terms of national development, not only to maintain situations, but also that our policies, plans, and programs may be measured, the impact. And for this, it is indispensable to have everything updated. And we're asked to constantly assess, because if you don't measure it, well, any outcome is good. And as the gentleman from the Dominican Republic so rightly said, a lot of the plans and programs are mere poetry. So we need concrete data. And in this, planning is also managing outcomes for development. So we have not only a policy, a program, a project, but that we can identify the target based on what we're going to consider growth, impact. How can we measure it? Who's responsible? And so we bring all these things together to measure the efficiency of these institutions. So planning cannot be only the intention of a government to do this or that. On the contrary, it must be institutionalized so that the techniques are integrated over time. And it's here that the questions said, how do we include prospection? And how do we ensure that these policies be carried out? There's a say that if you don't use cocoa, you'll have no chocolate. And so we must associate a budget to each plan and also responsibilities. We need to identify the capacities of these people. If not, it does not make much sense. And so planning must always be linked to a budget. The shortcomings of our planning come not only from the public sector. I, too, have seen planning in the private sector where there are plans, sizing, and then when you go to the budget, there is no connection between the two. So the shortcoming is in both sectors, public as well as private, and it is something that we must make progress on. As I always say, the relevance of linking planning to outcome-based planning, because this allows us to measure over time using our project management techniques. See, when will I have these results? Who will be responsible for doing these things? To what extent? And this requires of robust institutions that are possible to follow up on the different policies and programs. of the questions asked here was, what measures would we take for opening up information?
And when I speak about information, it's not only planning, not only to know the result, but for whom. And you need to remember that in planning, the purpose of information is not that we as institutions feel satisfied for what we did, but rather it's for citizens. Citizens need to be in the center of planning. It is citizens in the center. And when we speak about information, what is the information we are going to include? What is the capacity to provide it? What is the format to be provided for it to be monitored? It's not only if results-based or that is output-based, but rather all the objectives or results were achieved with the different plannings, but at the same time monitoring the fact that if resources were invested, if they did generate the quality, it had to be obtained. Here in question number 4, in a questionnaire about the opening of or openness of information, citizen participation, and why is this important for this to happen in the pandemic. I will share with you this brief presentation. You tell me if you are seeing this. Yes? Fine. Perfect. So, an independent review mechanism of OGP. And it says that in a context marked by a low trust level of population at political and economic level, the open government agenda defined in the action plan represents an opportunity to see to the causes that give rise to that distrust and improve it through transparency practices in considering response to the nationally relevant challenges. Costa Rica is a member of OGP since 2012, led by the executive branch, and gradually it has included not only government, but academia, private sector, and civil society organizations. If we speak of citizen participation, we need to have all the players of society, and the idea is that we involve different branches, judiciary, legislative, and in the case of Costa Rica Supreme Tribunal, so as to be an open state, not only open government of the executive branch. And what is the purpose of this data opening is to propose policies, guidelines, strategies in open government, and allowing us to change the way in how we plan, perform, and account for. And their citizen participation is not only to hear the options or solution options, but to create in a collaborative or co-create together with citizens. It's jointly that we are building, not that you provide the input and I give the output. And that once built, this process jointly, that it be transparent to everyone. To show you the coherence between this and previous government. In the previous administration, the National Development Plan was presented, and one of the pillars, number 3, said that one of the pillars for this development plan was an open, transparent, efficient government. Why? Because that prevents corruption, at least decreases it. Corruption needs hiding data, nobody finding out about it, but in an open government, transparent government, corruption has no place. In this administration, the Alvarado Quesada administration, one of the elements, the 5th element of the new national development plan is open government, which is no longer a fashion or a trend, but it's part, cross-sectional part in planning. You can no longer think about planning without considering the part of these open data of open government. And to get to this point, 4 action plans have been enacted from 2013 and 14. It was only of the executive branch. No other sectors were included. It was an initial process. Then 2015 biannual plans, a methodology was adopted, and civil society was included. And for the first time, commitments were signed on open data. And to have that habit, 2017 and 19, there is co-creation process, not only citizen participation, but also the building of what is coming needs to be co-created, where there are very important elements like gender equality, environment, and open hiring. That is very important in order to expose this situation. And in the 2019-2021 action plan, we are already working to become an open state. The initiative that began in the executive branch to be something permeating the other 3 branches. Why do we want this open state? In April 2019, the 4 presidents of the branches signed an agreement to commit from each institution to generate terms and conditions for an open state. And there you have the evidence where the president, the speaker of Parliament, the president of the tribunal and of the judiciary commit and support this initiative, because accountability was given rise to and generate trust by citizens. What is the value of an open state is what we want to become, or move from open state national commission to a national state of open government. We are about to publish a decree because although the commitment already exists, but there are many situations where this is voluntary. In the case of Costa Rica, local governments are autonomous, and therefore to adhere or endorse this process would only be on a voluntary basis. And if it is something in pro of transparency of the 82 local governments, we have been pioneers in Latin America. And the idea is not only to build, but to learn in the process. In this progress, what we said is that we started improving the co-creation process. And it's not that we were doing it badly or but rather how we have tried to improve according to the comments, observation. We've included social sectors, private sector, and governments. We are currently working the open government policy. And what are the challenges, pending tasks in order to achieve this objective? Is that the commitments of each branch of the Republic be reflected in their budgets, action plans, and that proposals of citizens be integrated in those plans. Also to have an appropriate balance between citizen proposals and capacity of institutions to implement them. Because if we speak of open government, there is a whole avalanche of needs and requests. But we need to be mindful that there are many, many demands and many limitations, not only resource-wise, but technical, institutional. That's impossible to remedy all problems, but that is why we have the open part. What can we do? What cannot be done? And how can this be corrected? Another challenge is to have continuity among processes, regardless of administrations, that this open government process be something institutional and not merely a tool. That it not only be an expectation, but something formal in all governments, and to involve other players. Still, we need to include the 81 local governments of the country. We are working on that. Regarding COVID-19, how have we tried to be consistent between open government and COVID? Here, COVID19.go.cr was created. Here is where the general population can see all the data, all the regulations, protocols, all the warnings, when do you have closing dates, so that the formats to be used for different exceptions to be there, for data to be, official data to be centralized, news, videos, to be a reliable source of information, and leave aside the very negative influence of fake news. What have we done? In the case of information transparency, is create the portal, publish statistics on progress or backwardness, and that it be useful for the citizens, truthful and updated. One of the programs was the Protect bonus, but it was for the citizens to know what you required, who would receive it, and all these statistics to be accountable insofar as public resources. To conclude, I will refer to the last question. What other capacities need to be developed and strengthened for post-pandemic recovery? And here, there is something that many years ago was a desirable variable. Going to college it was a desired variable, then mandatory, then knowing English. It was desired and now mandatory. And what is mandatory variable do we require for citizens to use or maintain big data, information management? Because it cannot be that all persons depend on only one department or institution for information. And that is why governments need to implement the fact that all departments or units specialize in managing big data, in data mining, in data clearance, in data purging, so that public policies, projects, and plans and programs can be developed and information-based and not expectations-based. The data management is the most important capacity that needs to be developed from now on in all private and public institutions, because information era is past. We are in the era of use of information, because all the information is in Google and everywhere. And now we need to discriminate or differentiate what's real from that which is not. How can it be used for better perspectives, better projects, and efficient use of resources? That is it. Thank you. I think I stuck to time. I only exceeded a few minutes. We tried to answer the 5 questions that were sent. Hopefully it will be useful. There you have the data, not only, but also mideplan.cr, and also in the National Development Plan, page, public investment, you can see how that different programs and plans are linked to the essential pillars, objectives, to the SDGs, and the structure of results for development, and maybe can be used as a tool to avoid what the Speaker of the Dominican Republic said, that is that planning remaining only poetry. Thank you for the time. Yes. I was waiting for your introduction. Thank you, everyone, again. I would like to refer to aspects that I deem of great importance, and that is the need to create certain institutionalities or institutions. But beyond the institutionality of the public sector is to build within them permanent officials teams or officers team, because however, I mean, governments move on, and what you need to have is permanent officers, which at the end of the road, that is what you, they are the ones that do the things or develop the tasks that really implement the plans. And we have learned that the only way or the best way to give adequate response is to have expertise. And expertise is in the staffs that unfortunately have moved. You have problems. You have problems, challenging situations, and staffs have experience, have collective memory, and advise the authorities for them to adopt certain adequate response measures. Perhaps that is one of the advantages that Uruguay had when we had COVID emergency. There were several people in the team that had a long-standing expertise in other complex situations, not pandemics, but difficult, very complex situations, and therefore, clearly a strategy of planning from day one, although the government had taken office only 12 days when we had the pandemic here in Uruguay, and clearly there was no preparation, or we hadn't internalized the problem. In 1 week, in a bit less than 1 week, teams were set up, and we incorporated the experience of other countries. We started to see others emergencies, not pandemic only, but economic emergencies. We were undergoing a supply shock and a demand shock because we didn't have the income to maintain the demand, and therefore we needed to resort to planning, because you can create more state or less state, but you never can doubt that it is the state, the one that prevails, if there is no centrality or if there is no coordination and planning from the central power for a rapid response. Then what's the point of having a state if it didn't have the power to prevail? Uruguay adopted fast responses in a few days, or a previous colleague said it.
Fue lo que dijo nosotros.
Yes, I think it was Pavel. And there we figured out which sectors had to remain open and which not. That was basically looking at quadrants with less health risk and with more value added. And evidently, we couldn't restrict those with a greater health risk for propagation or intrinsic as well. Now, the agricultural activity is very important. It wasn't dealt with, but we had precautionary measures to foreign trade, and all of the supply of food stuff and all of the plants manufacturing, the payment systems were maintained because of there were a change in the standards and there was liquidity allowances and that sort of thing. The idea was to maintain the payment system through the functioning of ATMs, banks, etc. This planning at first was done by the authorities at first and the technical teams. "40 days after the beginning of the pandemic, the government set up the scientific advisory committee with scientists involved. And there was a technical team divided by different medical specialties. There were pediatrics, geriatrics, etc. And there were also other scientists. And these gave in support for other decisions that had to be made. The opening, for example, of shopping centers, of schools, although they were closed until a few weeks ago. The opening of shows, showrooms, theaters, public shows, etc. Protocols were made and drafted, but then something else happened. We started strengthening the links with the subnational emergency systems. The country has a national emergency system that never imagined they would have to attend this kind of emergency. And there was coordination with subnational systems for other matters. So very rapidly, a system had to be figured out through meetings with other experts for these emergencies. The government did not wish to make a mandatory quarantine at first. Conversations were conducted with the president, and they said that information had to be provided as time went on. More data was needed, such as how many patients had recovered, what was happening in the different communities in certain places. So information was improved on how to prevent infection and so on. We then started authorizing a few activities. At first, and not without difficulties, as has happened elsewhere, we had to strengthen the national production capacity. We did have the funds to import goods, but these goods just didn't arrive. The national industry and our labs and our scientific institutes did react. Resources were provided, and as a result, we were able to follow-up. We had already developed our traceability capabilities, but we didn't have testing capabilities. So we developed it, and the time came when we thought that we wouldn't have any more cases. We were seeing like one case a day. But we have an open frontier with Brazil. And in Brazil, the pandemic attacked with greater strength. At mid-June, we realized that we couldn't control everything, although we didn't have that many cases. And in about 3 or 4 weeks, the cases became more numerous. 500 active cases is not that many, and these are amounts that we still had the possibility to follow up. But we were leaving the comfort we felt at the beginning. So that was the situation. Now, from then on, let us take a look at lessons learned. The participation of subnational governments. Let's see that. First of all, transparency and the so-called open government are fundamental. Secondly, emergency situation must involve all sorts of coordination. And our office, by the way, advises the presidency. And here, there must be full coordination. Pavel's words were clear and concrete. We do understand that in talking about coordination and planning, we must separate the role of the central government and the local governments. In a country such as Uruguay, well, we're talking about a small country as compared to the rest of South America, and it's not a very populated country with a lot of demographic concentration in the capital city and the other large cities. Clearly, we must distinguish a couple of things here. Subnational governments must be strengthened in terms of human capital. We noticed that there are failings in human capital in certain areas. I don't know the situation of other regions, but this is something that happens in Uruguay. If we don't have qualified people, then we won't be able to reach our goals. We must also separate functions. The greatest kind of coordination in a centralized government, such as Uruguay, involves investment going into the subnational governments. And this involves physical investment. There are some places where the coordination is more flexible. There, policies must be adapted to the locality. For example, in education, there are places where education has to be different because they have a completely different productive matrix. We have a central government, we have a central government, a central police, and here we find an important topic that must be studied. Health is also in central hands. As you well know, our budget is a 5-year budget, but we do have yearly revisions. And in this budget, we took office in March the 1st, and immediately afterwards, the pandemic arrived, and we had to make a review in August with a lot of uncertainty. So we had to plan and coordinate with the subnational governments in the midst of this conundrum. I would say that this situation brings in a lot of learning, though. First, our country did react quickly. Secondly, the stable technical organizations do give strong support to action. Using science from the very beginning indeed supports decisions. It gives coherence, and it also grants support to the citizens. The citizens do realize that we're not just talking about a political decision. And, for example, wearing the masks and the distancing that is needed is not something political, but it's something that is advised by the medical and scientific authorities, and the people trust them. This is very important. The other lesson learned is that response systems from the governments had to receive assistance. We must foresee situations that occurred here for the first time. And I'd like to quit here and thank you for your attention. Very well. Jose Agustin, please unmute your microphone. There you are. You started talking in a way that sounded like music to me, and your conclusion was also music to my ears. First of all, the panel is about resiliency, and much of the capability to face the scourge that is coming because of pandemics or climate change will be related to precisely what you said. Being able to maintain experts, well-trained staff, human resources that are untouchable in a government structure must exist so that they may efficiently respond when there is danger. I also would like to talk about the intersectorial nature. We all do understand, to a greater or lesser extent, intersectoriality, but we're not really managing well the multiscalarity. And why do I say that your words were music to my ears? Precisely because of this. And I'd like to end up by saying that territory is the place where action arrives. All of the passion, all of the powers, all of the strength and weaknesses, there is where mankind's history is written. That is why this must be understood by the argument that there's no way to define the individual to the group, to the community, society, without placing them in a certain territorial, geographic place. I wanted to quote this. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jose. The time has come to hear comments by the delegates. I do have a question. May I pose it, Chair? Cielo, go ahead. Thank you. I have spoken, but apparently you didn't hear me. Thank you so much for these presentations. I do have a question, and that is related to keeping the commitment of the team of civil services servants. Was it who entered your office? Was it the president? Thank you, President. Thank you so much. I'm checking to see if he's really working. He's really on the job. Oh, indeed, he's working very hard. Believe me. He has been moderator and he has conducted with excellent aplomb. Thank you, Mr. President. This has been fantastic presentation. The question has to do with the skills needed and how to maintain them during the political cycles. This is something that happens in our democracy. Governments come and go. So how can we keep the well-trained staff? And this should involve an agreement amongst all. This is the big question. How to build a team that will last different political cycles. This is something that perhaps can be valid for all countries, and it was a pleasure to greet the president. It was by chance. It was not planned. That's how he is. He doesn't always calls our presence in his office. He comes to visit us. He doesn't really follow that much protocol. He is very respected, but sometimes he skips protocol, which is just wonderful. Now, Paraguay. We have asked the floor. Our General Director of Public Policies would like to express his feelings on this. Certainly, but I'm afraid we are way behind schedule, so I ask that he be as brief as possible. Good afternoon. I am Mario Ruiz Diaz, General Director of Planning and Public Policy from the Planning Department. Let me talk about what Paraguay has been doing in facing the pandemic. And I'd like to speak up, not so much from the medical standpoint. Paraguay has been one of the countries to decide on strict quarantine and lockdown. And that was helpful to create the conditions to face COVID. And this was useful in order to equip our hospitals and to get the system running. We have to take a look at the effects. And the first thing that we did was to pass an emergency law that enabled the executive branch to place a large amount of money to be available for granting loans. This emergency law provided resources that had been destined for the most vulnerable sectors that had been strongly affected by the pandemic. We're talking about informal sectors. Since then, new initiatives were made, such as funds addressed for SMEs and special credit lines to strengthen the work of other sectors. And this is very important for the economy. And this involved strong work, and it has indeed brought results. Some naturally do not agree with this because they do see inconvenience in the public procurement system. But I would say that this has been pretty useful, and it's a measure that has brought important results.
The challenge ahead is still there because we don't yet have a full assessment on what could be the real impact of the epidemic here on. We're talking about in contagion processes and so on, but that could imply new challenges. So that was it, really. And once again, say that what has been said this morning in terms of inequality and increasing poverty, yes, we are yet going to see very important effects. So thank you for the opportunity. But I did want to mention what we had been doing in Paraguay. Well, thank you very much for that intervention and for the clearly and briefly that you spoke. Well, if there are no further requests for the floor, then? No? No, I see no further requests. And so, we're supposed to have a short break now, but since it is now 5:05 in the evening here, that we take barely 10 minutes and come back at 5:15 in another 10 minutes, so as to move on to the last item on the agenda. Resolutions and our next meeting. Thank you.
¿Estamos de acuerdo?
Do we agree? Very well. So, see you back here in 10 minutes. Thank you.
por contribuir a un mejor conocimiento, difusión e implementación de los derechos de acceso a la información, la participación pública y el acceso a la justicia en asuntos ambientales consagrados en el principio 10 de la Declaración de Río sobre Medio Ambiente y Desarrollo. El observatorio ofrece referencias destacadas de los derechos de acceso en leyes, políticas, jurisprudencia y tratados relativos a los 33 países de América Latina y el Caribe. Además, proporciona acceso a publicaciones, datos, mapas y recursos relacionados y cuenta con temáticas como biodiversidad, cambio climático, género, educación ambiental, minería, pueblos indígenas o defensores ambientales. Como centro de intercambio de información, el observatorio busca hacer un aporte a la implementación del Acuerdo Regional sobre el acceso a la información, la participación pública y el acceso a la justicia en asuntos ambientales en América Latina y el Caribe, Acuerdo de Escazú. El Observatorio COVID-19 en América Latina y el Caribe es una plataforma impulsada por la CEPAL a solicitud de la Comunidad de Estados Latinoamericanos y Caribeños CELAC. El observatorio rastrea las políticas públicas que los países de América Latina y el Caribe están implementando para limitar el impacto de la pandemia del COVID-19 en la región. A través de informes y documentos, ofrece análisis de los impactos económicos y sociales que estas políticas tendrán a nivel nacional y sectorial, además de apoyar su revisión y seguimiento a mediano y largo plazo. En un mapa interactivo, los interesados pueden visualizar de manera clara las acciones realizadas por cada país en materia de restricciones a desplazamientos, salud, economía, empleo, protección social, educación y género. Visita el Observatorio COVID-19 de la CEPAL y accede a información actualizada de las medidas de política para enfrentar la crisis en la región. Atendiendo el llamado del secretario general de las Naciones Unidas, Antonio Guterres, quien propuso el establecimiento de centros regionales de gestión del conocimiento, la Comisión Económica para América Latina y el Caribe y el Programa de las Naciones Unidas para el Desarrollo, en conjunto con los fondos, programas y agencias especializadas del Sistema de las Naciones Unidas y la Oficina de Coordinación del Desarrollo para América Latina y el Caribe, se unieron para diseñar e implementar el portal de los ODS, una plataforma web que busca ser un factor clave para la coordinación y la disponibilidad de los activos regionales del Sistema de las Naciones Unidas en América Latina y el Caribe. Este centro de gestión del conocimiento en línea tiene por objeto servir de punto de encuentro y referencia para toda la información relacionada con los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible, incluidas actividades, recursos de información, estadísticas, datos regionales, instrumentos analíticos específicos y productos de conocimiento desarrollados y proporcionados por el Sistema de Desarrollo de las Naciones Unidas en respuesta a las necesidades de los países miembros. Visita esta importante plataforma multiactor y conoce más acerca de este centro de gestión del conocimiento regional en línea.
In the very year that the United Nations launched the Decade for Action to ignite a more purposeful understanding of the part of the international community towards advancing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the world has confronted unprecedented change in the specter of COVID-19. The multi-dimensioned impact of this pandemic has served to dramatize the true scale of the vulnerability of the small, heavily indebted, undiversified economies of the Caribbean, and has forced creative exploration of every opportunity within the reach of our member states to secure urgent relief. The 2020 meetings of the Caribbean Development Roundtable and the Caribbean Development and Cooperation Committee will offer space for taking stock of the progress so far made in persuading the international community to extend this financial support needed, middle income status notwithstanding, and to dialogue on those strategies that will take you from vulnerability to resilient development, from economic peril to recovery and dynamic growth. It is an opportunity to consider how together we strengthen partnerships for action that is responsive to the unique vulnerabilities of the Caribbean, and that assures tangible progress through the application of innovative problem solving in these precarious times.
El Observatorio de Desarrollo Social en América Latina y el Caribe es una herramienta regional de conocimiento de la CEPAL. Su creación responde a un mandato de la segunda reunión de la Conferencia Regional sobre Desarrollo Social de América Latina y el Caribe, cuando los Estados miembros le solicitaron a la CEPAL la conformación de un observatorio de desarrollo social que acompañe el diseño y la implementación de las políticas públicas y permita monitorear sus tendencias. De esta forma, el observatorio promueve el desarrollo integral de América Latina y el Caribe con enfoque de derechos y de igualdad a través del análisis de la situación social de la región, de las políticas públicas y de la asistencia técnica a los países que lo soliciten. El observatorio también integra un conjunto de plataformas digitales. Se destacan las bases de datos sobre inversión social, programas de protección social no contributiva, institucionalidad social en América Latina y el Caribe, juventud e inclusión social y de compromisos regionales y subregionales en materia de desarrollo social. A través de su división de desarrollo social, la CEPAL publica, actualiza y amplía estas bases que están a disposición de los gobiernos y del público en general. El Anuario Estadístico de América Latina y el Caribe es uno de los 6 informes anuales de la CEPAL. En él se presenta un conjunto de estadísticas básicas que caracterizan la situación económica, sociodemográfica y ambiental de la región referidas a un periodo en particular. El anuario estadístico constituye una referencia para quienes deseen contar con datos estadísticos descriptivos comparables entre países y en el tiempo. También contribuye a promover la generación y uso de información estadística internacionalmente comparable, oportuna y pertinente para la formulación, seguimiento y evaluación de políticas de desarrollo económico, social y ambiental en la región. Porque lo que no se mide no cuenta, la CEPAL insta a romper los silencios estadísticos y buscar más y mejores datos para avanzar hacia un desarrollo sostenible con igualdad. El Observatorio de Igualdad de Género de América Latina y el Caribe tiene como propósito contribuir al fortalecimiento de los mecanismos nacionales para el adelanto de las mujeres, poner a disposición pública información oficial de los gobiernos de la región y facilitar el seguimiento de los acuerdos internacionales de derechos de las mujeres. A través de este observatorio se da seguimiento a la situación de las mujeres en la región, en particular los avances relacionados con su autonomía física, económica y en la toma de decisiones y sus interrelaciones. ¿Qué información se puede encontrar en esta herramienta? Indicadores, informes y estudios, repositorio de leyes, análisis de políticas para la igualdad de género y recursos de difusión. ¿Sabías que, con información que entregan los países, la CEPAL creó un observatorio para conocer, analizar y difundir cómo planifican en la región de América Latina y el Caribe para lograr su desarrollo? Concentra en un solo sitio información sobre los sistemas nacionales de planificación de la región. Los sistemas incluyen los planes nacionales, subnacionales, como también marcos legales, actores gubernamentales y de la sociedad civil, mecanismos de coordinación e implementación y su vinculación con la Agenda 2030 y los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible. Es una plataforma abierta para quienes estén interesados en el ejercicio técnico, político y administrativo de la planificación para el desarrollo, en especial los gobiernos.
Bien.
Very well. Cielo, Luis. You've made our day. The President made our day and the afternoon. So we feel very joyful with that spontaneity and the dedication. So, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for staying here. This rather long day, but so passionate, and I'm sure that we're going to see this at the end, Director Alfie, that we will not try to sum this up because that would be impossible. The wealth of the discussions has been so broad, and also the wealth of the experiences shared in each panel, and the challenges on the table so broad that we will try to pick up on them. But well, in closing. And we're now in the third section of the meeting that I described at the start, and that has to do with accountability of ILPES. And this accountability is not just a matter of describing the activities carried out since last year when we were in Montevideo, that we did a break, and just over a year has gone by since then. But also we're linking these activities to the other things that requests that by resolution were adopted in Montevideo last year. And so I would like to recall what was it that was approved with these resolutions in broad terms. I will not read it because I don't think that makes much sense. But the truth is that the Regional Planning Council in this resolution asked ILPES and ECLAC, please continue with activities to strengthen the national planning system. And the broadening of instruments, resources, the regional planning observatory to exchange good practices and strengthen capacities, and as we've heard in the three panels, and that is why I say that I feel the discussion is so passionate, strengthening or capacity building in all stages and cycles of public administration, in all areas that are relevant to public administration, planning, monitoring, budgets, assessment, learning among peers, strengthening these spaces to have collective knowledge. And also we were asked to connect planning, national planning, and the relation that this had with the commitments included in the Paris Agreement. And the other thing, substantive part, is to try and propose a topic for the next position document of the CRP. And we're going to make a proposal because I think that there's a series of topics that have come up in all panels. And throughout these months, ECLAC has been observing all the measures taken by countries of different types. And so these topics come up repeatedly. And so we will begin by recalling these resolutions. And so for this, I will hand over or move on to describe what ILPES has done in the last year. The first thing, I would like to recall how ILPES works, because some are new and you're taking part for the first time, and others, well, I apologize because I'm sure you've already seen this figure, but just a matter of recalling it. ILPES has three interconnected modalities: technical cooperation, training, and research, applied research. These are three ways of working that are feedback among each other. And so when we offer a training course and we have all of these people who are professionals in each one of the topics related to public administration, so we try to pick up, first of all, include their experience that they contribute to the classroom, and second, trying to systematize that experience and trying to systematize the case of important experiences to strengthen the exchange of these ideas that in general what they do is manage regional knowledge. And so the ultimate goal of all of these modalities or ways of working that have to do with ILPES's raison d'etre is knowledge, planning, and public administration in order to strengthen planning systems, to strengthen planning as a technical political exercise. And that right from the start, our deputy executive secretary, Mario Cimoli, and the other also pointed out. And so we also have specific topics related to planning and public administration, and lastly, resources to facilitate the way that we're going to manage that knowledge. These are platforms, resources, methodologies, such as the observatory, the barometer plan, the networks of experts, in this case, the Smith network of the National Public Investment Systems in planning for development. This is the way that we're going to tell you what we have done very quickly during the year. Now, let's begin with technical cooperation. I wanted to say that we've done this in the last year, 28 technical cooperation missions in 8 countries of the region. As I said, this is from July last year, 2019, through July 2020. The countries that received this technical cooperation: Costa Rica, Ecuador, Honduras, Guatemala, Panama, Paraguay, Mexico, and Uruguay. And the themes of this technical cooperation has been very varied. In the case of Panama, we did technical assistance in terms of a very interesting political dialogue. And so I would like to once again thank Jamaica that took part in that dialogue, also Guatemala and the Dominican Republic, and who were generous enough to share their experience within the institutional frameworks within which planning is done, nationally as well as subnationally, and that they shared it with Panama, that is precisely strengthening their national planning system. That was one theme. The other has been open government. In Costa Rica, for example, we carried out 2 very interesting technical assistance in projects. One on the interoperability of government systems to provide better quality services. And this was explained very well by the vice minister or deputy minister when he said this would be the way of using the information, using it through digitalization and the interoperability of the systems. But also we did technical assistance so that Costa Rica had asked, this is all technical assistance at the request of the countries, but Costa Rica asked us for support to devise a policy for regional development. And maybe Maria Milagros is connected because she has been a tireless collaborator in terms of the territory, and that has the topic has come up during the last 3 panels as a very relevant in order to achieve the development of our countries, to achieve the recovery coming out of the crisis, and that this crisis will continue for quite a time longer, but also to build resilience, not to recover and go back to where we were before, no, but to have better development with greater equality, more sustainability. Other themes, policy assessment, as with Mexico and Coreval, that goes back about a decade that we've been supporting them with that. Uruguay, with whom we did a study on the cross-cutting effect of gender equality in terms of state interventions in specific territory. Just to give an example, Honduras, a perspective for development. Guatemala, also prospections, and help in the drafting of their voluntary report to put to the high-level forum on their performance in the achievement of the 2030 Agenda. Then, in terms of training, well, I think that here I should mention that the changes that created not only by COVID as of March, but we in Chile, we faced the social outburst that began in October last year, and that this was really an event that made us rethink so many things, but especially our training system. And so the education at a distance offer increased tremendously. We were able to do this. We'd already done education at a distance for a long time previously, but we'd never been able to make it mass available, bring it to another level as we've done now. And this has increased the participation by 4% in the previous biennium, 2018-2019, to 33% in 1 year, in under 1 year. And so I believe that this is evidence of the resilience, the ability to transform ourselves and continue with our training supply to do capacity building, especially in international courses, offering this at a distance. We know that there is an oversupply of this sort of conferences, seminars, and so on, but we must continue to build capacities, as Director Alfie has said, as also the other authorities, Jose Ortin and Dr. Wayne Henry, Dr. Joseph, and so on. Well, the issue of capacity building, capacity strengthening, and having a core team within organizations, this too encourages resilience in the face of crises in order to anticipate them, get ready, respond, and above all, plan recovery. And so we went from 4% to 33%, and we believe that this has been a great success. And here we have a list. I'm not going to read them out, but it's a very interesting list of the supply of courses at a distance, some given, others that are ongoing, and that were all came about after the cutoff in the report. But I thought it was interesting to mention them because the cutoff was in the month of July, and we reflected here from July through September the last 3, 4, 5 courses, and there's a potential of more than 200 participants in under 3 months, which shows the degree of acceptance and above all the need to keep our capacities updated, to share experiences contributed by each one to these courses. In addition to that, aside from maintaining and translating what we're offering, we also have a new course that picks up on the experience of more than a decade in applying the DALA methodology. The DALA methodology is damage and loss assessment, DALA, which is done post-disaster to calculate the damages and how many resources would be required to recover. It goes back more than a decade, applying this in countries, supporting countries to identify where the greatest damage is. The new methodology Luis is correcting me, but this was first applied in 1972. And so it is a milestone. It's a course that was devised in English to have a greater coverage in the Caribbean countries, and also we have a Spanish version. But we believe that, especially now, it is very valid on account of the pandemic.
As to the applied research method at ILPES and ECLAC, of course, many studies are generated, but it's not academic studies, but applied information about subjects of development, and for the case of ILPES, planning and public management. We generated 7 planning notes, not more than 20 pages each, going deep into a specific topic, and are published at the observatory, and people consulted because they are short, to the point, with systematic experiences, and what they try to do is keep up to date. The observatory highly updated about the information that is being done or experience that is being built in planning and public management. Topics are varied: open government, territory-driven 2030 agenda, and 3 papers on events we've held and sponsored, which are called Planning Days, 3 volumes, also a guideline. And when the Vice Minister Pavelli referred to the Caribbean authorities, this is action. I love poetry, I love art, but not when it's a matter of planning. Planning needs to be action. And that is also included and expressed through methodologies of different meetings when they tell us, please generate guidelines, methodologies, instruments that will allow for better work. And this is what we try to do about the 2030 agenda. And then the last book on the right is position paper for the Regional Planning Council that we presented in Uruguay last year. Territory matters. It's a subject always of concern for ECLAC and ILPES because of what it represents insofar as development and the need that development policies to have a territorial approach take into account the differences and potential. We have a new research line. This is really a preview. I mean, it's a linking of SDGs to planning, specific SDGs, but in this first phase, we have a planning note that was published yesterday in the Observatory, Action for Climate, and that is the link between planning and the commitments subscribed at the Paris Accord on what countries voluntarily need to declare and the areas in which they will reduce greenhouse gas emissions, either construction, agriculture, or several areas. Knowledge resources. I was telling you we have several regional platforms that promote collective learning, exchange of experiences, and that the one that really has organized this work is the Regional Planning Observatory. It's a collective building space of knowledge building space where all countries participate, civil society, government officials. We validate information. We take official information in order to describe, identify, analyze the trends of national planning systems. What is happening with the processes, what is happening with institutions, what is happening with consultation processes. Vice Minister of Costa Rica, open government is here to stay. Data opening, collaboration, citizens, participation, all this is what is observed by the observatory. What is happening in public management, planning, public budget, policy, evaluation, and how do we learn? How do we generate that space for collective learning? Also, as big news, here we have the SNP network with more than 10 years in ECLAC. And ILPES, it's part of the, we are part of the technical secretariat of SNP network. We are working with the SNP network together with GIZ and IDB. Among the 4 pillars of this network that is designed to promote the use of IT in order to have project banks and at the same time promoting transparency, training, regulations, and providing a forum for learning of persistent challenges in public investment. And already the quality of expenditure has never been as important as today, when there is such a fiscal narrowness to see the quality of spending. And we feel very proud that we've had in the last year more than 1 million clicks or visits to the observatory. It's truly interesting, very much up to date, and to be in constant contact with reality, what is happening in the countries and the territories. Barometer plan is a description of national planning systems. We moved one scale above and we are digitized. It is only in an app for Android, not yet for Apple. It is digital. You can choose what type of barometer plan is to be applied. It has been simplified and expanded at the same time with different views and schemes in order to include the areas that have greater strengths and those that require greater work in order to have a national robust planning system. At this point in time is so important to maintain coordination, articulation of policies that will have a much greater impact at times that we need it so badly as now to respond to the emergency and recovery. So, barometer plan allows for remote apps integrating previous models nationally and subnationally, different graphs to have a clear picture of where are the areas calling for greater work. And it has reorganized criteria so as to make it simpler. Several apps were done in the year. This is part of the instrument launched last year. Apps were taken in Barba, Costa Rica, Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic, and the Territory Development Policy of Mideplan. Among the surveys we had to improve the tool, well, we received a series of recommendations like harmonization of the language, greater application of the resource, greater capacity. Now, in the network, we've seen the observatory, the barometer plan. Let us go to our networks and regional knowledge platforms. This NIP, we have 19 countries participating. We share it with the IDB and GIZ, 4 pillars. Now, public investment will play a crucial role in post-pandemic recovery, but not only can we think of public investment, but in private investment and public-private partnerships. So, and the multi-criteria app in order to consider the environmental and socio-economic profitability. Development Planning Network, 2 years we've been with this operational network, was launched in Montevideo 2018 in a course sponsored by CEPAL. We have more than 2,000 members and 4 topics like public leadership. We are interested in keeping this network alive. in order to collect the experience or compile experience from students graduating from different courses, and it is very active, and hopefully it will be. That's the first present meeting or face-to-face meeting of the network. It has been a tremendous support, especially referring to solidarity economy in Dominican Republic. We have ACIDs, CODs. These are partnerships of networks, and we share many of the concerns that really do or have to do with the development planning and public management. We use different resources, interviews, webinars. We have synchronous, asynchronous fora, thematic discussions in relevant issues. We couldn't have all these activities if we didn't have the partners. We have strategic alliances, and we keep them and maintain them. In the case of IDB, UNDP, we have a strategic partnership with Open Government Partnerships, OGP, and also with donors like the Spanish, Korean, and German cooperation. And governments of countries, very important partners, and we have with Panama, Mexico, Uruguay, and NGOs. Here we are entering a different phase of resolutions where we needed to go over the regular government contributions. The system or contributions that was created in the 80s has not changed. However, it's a complicated moment to see if it is updated or not. But what's important is that all countries need to know that resources for ILPES operations are based on a mosaic of financing. An important part of that is contributions of countries on a regular basis, governments of countries on a regular basis. And we have called on each one for these contributions to be maintained, and so that we can continue with our working agenda and bilateral technical assistance that in some cases are funded by the countries themselves, but others require our technical cooperation, and we make no difference as if they contribute or not contribute. That's our mandate. We go and cooperate. We need your collaboration for that to continue. On this second graph, we can see the downward trend of contributions that until 2020 we have only $421,000 in when we really need many more resources than that. Hopefully, we can continue complying with our mandate, and DECLAC supports us in everything, but that part of the financing mosaic depends on countries, and we need your collaboration. Future activities. And in future activities, we are working very strongly in the consolidation of remote or distance courses, because this was mentioned from the inauguration, and you've said it also. And the crisis will persist for a longer time than what we had thought originally. And the recovery is going to take time for many years. We think that's important to maintain remote courses as a supplement to our offer of face-to-face courses. Will never be replaced, of course, but at least it's a supplement and helping access to training on topics that have been always requested, like project evaluation, logical framework for project formulation, development prospects, public leadership, open government, planning, strategic planning, and territorial order, gender-based planning. All of these, which are the courses that we have internationally offered, but also we offer courses very much adapted to reality of countries. We try to keep them, hopefully resume them, but really we believe that this offer of remote courses that we are consolidating and we will finish, or all the offer will be ready for the first 4 months of next year. It's important to have it as a major heap and an option when it's impossible to move to Santiago or Mexico, where most of the trainings take place. This observatory is in its fifth stage. We always try to keep it with greater analysis and possibilities to share that knowledge of what is happening, of the trends, and what is happening in the region. In the case of the fifth phase, we are going to begin to analyze some sustainable development goals and see its cross-sectional nature, but also we will go deep into the national contributions, the NDCs, and see how we can call the attention of how do we find those complementarities, convergences, or also see if there are contradictions between commitments and plannings or mere gaps when there is a true commitment of a country regarding an international agreement like the Paris agreements. Future activities of barometer plan as requested, and you've seen it on the graph on how we can go in or what are those areas where we need to improve. They tell us, please, more applications of this tool, expand the basis for implementation, consolidate a user network of the barometer plan for them, users to exchange experiences or areas or of where they can have an experience. What are the changes, live instruments, live tools, and if there are changes, we want to set it in the record so that that experience can be useful to other governments, and of course articulate all these results within the framework of the regional planning observatory. Future activities of the network need to be very active. We'll have one first interactive paper of the network on prospects and the post-pandemic stage is playing a key role, building of future scenarios. This is not going to be the last crisis. There will be other pandemics. Crisis due to climate change will also be present. Water stress is already present. So we need to strengthen those capabilities of building future scenarios and be able to mitigate the effects of possible threats and risks on development. So this interactive book or notebook is going to be a living tool. What's important, who will contribute with certain channels, conceptual and working channels, but it's going to be a very interesting tool. The first